I wanted to, well, introduce our two amazing speakers today that are with us. So I'll just read a bit of their incredible bios. So Darren Lee, first of all, former elite cyclist, internationally renowned as a specialist in cycle-based power concept training for athletes from all sports, working as a consultant to top cycle studios and strength and conditioning coaches all over Europe. Some fun facts: Darren and his 20-year-old son are huge fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, same as me. He loves red wine, Kahilo coffee, and happens to be the creator of the cycling app CicloZone.
Hi, guys.
Some of you may have used it already. And with him today, we've got MEL Thomas, the legend. Mel, he had a successful career in competitive boxing and American football. He competed nationally and internationally for more than 30 years. Mel's a highly sought after fitness instructor and personal trainer and a regular presenter at Club La Santa as part of the Bodyworks Week of Fitness. Mel's also a huge fan of Marvel movies and the 1990 Chicago Bulls. You can't go wrong with that. And he's also an instructor on CicloZone, so you may have seen him on that as well. So yeah, thank you both so much for doing this, for offering your time and obviously expertise. So, so let's get started. What do you guys think about the new Captain America? No. I'm kidding.
Don't get me started. Which one? Which one?
No, we thought maybe we want to start about maybe briefly talk about bike setup and the importance of bike setup, as it obviously might have a direct impact on our efficiency and maybe even injury prevention. So I was wondering, is there a general recommended setup for indoor bikes? Is it different from a road bike? And is there anything unique with the Kaiser bike if a lot of us are using a Kaiser bike?
Yeah, first of all, hello to everybody. Thanks for joining us today. First of all, I want to say what a great group this is, the Kaiser M3R users group. I've kind of watched it for quite a long time, watched it grow. So it's an amazing group, a lot of common sense, a lot of good things spoken on here. So that's brilliant. And as we move after this lockdown, there's loads of questions. I mean, I've been fielding questions now for the last 12 to 14 months solidly, where people have just been direct messaging me on every format, every platform. And one of the biggest questions they ask is, do I set my bike up correctly? Now, bike setup in the world of cycling is absolutely critical. It's one of the first stops when you purchase a new bike, because your bike setup is directly relatable to how proficient you're going to be for riding that bike and obviously achieving what you want to achieve. On indoor cycling, it's slightly different. We don't have the ability to specialist fit a bike for everybody. Not everybody can afford to go to a specialist bike fitter and get that done. However, all indoor cycles have the adjustable areas of the bike that are necessary to we judge within around about a 7% perfect fit on most indoor cycle bikes. And the general rule of thumb is the same for all indoor cycle bikes. The general rule of thumb is it's generally because we're all generally proportioned very, very similarly. Okay, the height from our our collarbone to our hip, our collarbone to the end of our arms, and our hip bone down to our ankles generally are in proportion. There's a variance there, but not much. And most indoor cycle bikes are created around that kind of philosophy. They have an adjustment, which means you can adjust and minor adjust to bikes. The first stop always on all bikes is the seat height. The seat height is the I don't know if you agree, Mel, is what most people get wrong. I would say probably when I first came back from racing in Spain and I first got back into the indoor cycle world, I would say that 70% of all the people I was teaching in the classes set their saddles too low, which is it's something that's very easily corrected. But by having your saddle too low really isn't very good for riding a bike and can cause a number of issues. So first of all, saddle height is actually, as you stand next to the bike with your feet flat on the floor, is actually your hip bone height, okay? Not the top of your hip, because that's obviously the top of the pelvic bone. It's actually the pointed kind of profusion at the front of the pelvic bone itself. If you take your hand horizontally out from that point, stand next to the bike, and raise the saddle up till it's touching that hand, then generally you will have the correct height for your saddle. So, for example, on the Kaiser bike, they have the adjustment wheel at the back. Adjust it, lift it up until it reaches the bottom of the hand with the hand at hip bone height, and that is where the saddle will be. This is the same on all indoor cycle bikes, because it's the distance between the saddle and the center of the crank shaft, which is where your pedals are attached by the crank arms. That is the distance that's really, really important for getting the correct saddle height. A lot of people don't realize why this is important. It's important mainly for the way that your muscles work in the pedal rotation. It's the amount of contraction and the amount of extension on all of the muscle groups as you rotate the pedals. If it's too low, you get far too much contraction of the posterior chain and far too much extension on the anterior chain of muscles. So by lifting the saddle up, you balance between the anterior and posterior chain, which gives you a much better balance in the knee. So the height of the saddle is really, really important. Then the bit that most people get wrong, or a lot of people get wrong, and I still see it now, the handlebars are set at exactly the same height as the saddle. So the saddle becomes your metric data point for the whole bike setup. So effectively set your saddle height first, set the bar height the same as the saddle, and then you've got the correct height difference between those two areas of the bike where your hands and also your backside sits. The reason we need this correct, and we do have this way, is because there's a very important area of the body that we need to engage when riding a bike, and that is the core. If you don't have the handlebars at the same height as the saddle, you don't achieve that 40-degree angle on the lower back, which engages the core underneath it. If the bars are too high, you sit more upright, the core relaxes, which puts all the strain on the lower back. Most people who I've approached who said, I don't do indoor cycling because I got a bad back or it hurts my back, I then tell them to set the bike up for me, and you tend to find they've got the bars up here and the saddle down here. And as soon as you put it down there, when they first start to ride it, they have a slight moan because it's slightly less comfortable when they ride. But after a couple of weeks, they always come back and say, I don't have any more problems with my lower back. So generally that's where that goes. The Kaiser bike is actually a brilliant frame because the actual angle of the frame on the Kaiser bike is set the same as a road bike. So what happens is, no matter what height you put the seat, if you're someone who is as tall as Mel is, and he sets his saddle really, really high, and he sets the bars at the same height, you always create the correct distance between the bar and the saddle to create that 40-degree angle. If you have, for example, on a Kaiser bike, the bar's too high, not only do the bars raise up, but they raise out as well. So you end up reaching for the bars, which is not a great way to ride the bike at all. So from that point of view, those are really the basics for setting up the bike. The micro adjustments, especially on the M3i, the handlebars, set them in position 5, middle of the bar for everybody. Literally to start with, the front edge of the slider, middle of the bar, position 5, fix it in position. And then undo the saddle when you're seated on the saddle with your hands in the basic riding position. And what you need to do is place your feet at what we call the 3 and 9 flat position to the floor. So the front pedal and the back pedal are the same distance from the floor. So they're perfectly level. And what we need to do in that position is just take a look over your forward knee, and your kneecap should be directly above the middle of the pedal. If your saddle is too far forward, your knee will be over the toes. If the saddle is too far back, your knee will be over your laces. Once you've got the saddle in the correct position, so the knee falls directly over the toes with the feet flat in that position, tighten the saddle up, and that's it, you're away to go. The Kaiser bike makes this a little bit easier than some of the other bikes, but generally the setup is the same on all indoor cycle bikes. Seat height, bar height, fix the bars in position. A lot of spin bikes, you can't move the bar anywhere, but fix the bars in a mid-place position and then adjust your saddle. And then if you need to actually adjust the bars, for example, if you've got particularly long arms, short arms, or you can move the bars to suit, but as long as the rest of the bike is all set up in correct position. So generally that's how you set the Kaiser bike up, and any.
No, I mean that was really informative, and I've seen that too. Whether it was in classes, sometimes at the gym, people doing different heights. Is it? I mean, I appreciate what you said though too. Like someone who says maybe they have a sore back, but they like having their bars up. So yeah, basically, you're saying you would still recommend no, put them at the same height. You will find over time you're going to be more comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But
What you find from a fitness point of view, it's probably just my interjection here. It's very similar to people who say, I don't do sit-ups because I get back pain. And what you find is because you've got an imbalance of strength between in the core, so the front and the back of the actual core. When you actually get people starting to do ab exercise and that core starts to strengthen up, all of a sudden the back pain goes. And what you'll find is because this thing, if you imagine an old style Victorian girdle where the woman stood behind dressing the rich person, and they were pulling this corset nice and tight, and they were doing this. Well, that's exactly what the core does. You strengthen this core, and it's in particular with people that get older. So because if you look at people from even 15, 20 years ago, because fitness has become this, it's for everybody now. Certainly people of my parents' age didn't used to do fitness. They went to work, they retired, and that was it, and they got old. Now you're getting 60, 70, 80-year-olds that are super fit for their age. And that is because fitness is for everybody, and people have realized fitness is for everyone. And one of the big things that they are now realizing in old people's homes and even older people in general is if you keep this core nice and strong, it promotes health everywhere. And that's what you find when I certainly have people who say, I don't do sit-ups because I get lower back pain. You start improving the strength in their core, the back pain's gone. And that's two things. One, because this core's got stronger, and two, because you've increased from other exercise and activities the flexibility in the glutes and the hamstrings. And that's where a lot of back pain comes from, either tight hamstrings and glutes, and I call it the backside, so everything from calves all the way upwards, or from a very weak core. You strengthen that core up, and especially when you're riding a bike, you get in the right position on an indoor cycle, you strengthen that core up, keep it tight, you find that the back pain goes, and it's exactly what Darren's saying.
Yeah, and this is why bike setup is so important, because what Mel's saying there is that in any form of fitness or any form at all for the human body, balance between muscle groups is super important. And you need to balance the strain taken on the body when riding a bike between the core and the lower back. Now, by putting the bar too high, you're putting it all on the lower back. Now, that's not helping you gain a stronger core, but it's also going to make the lower back suffer because it's taking all of that upper body weight and the movement. And one area that people don't realize, especially when they start working with power, and therefore they start to actually push their body to, the limits that they want to ride to. They're riding, to create a better person, a better cyclist, a better, stronger, more powerful person, is the amount of power that comes from the core, through the hip flexor, actually down into the quads, that whole chain of muscle groups. Now, if you're not engaging the core, then that power won't start in the core. It'll start at the hip flexors. It'll just be directly into the quads. So it's a real great area that cycling helps enormously. Long periods of time, 40, 45 minutes, an hour on a bike in the correct position can really create quite a lot of tension in that core area without anybody actually realizing they're doing kind of core
exercises.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That maybe you mentioned power, so that kind of leads into that other topic of power-based training that we wanted to cover. So I know probably in this group we have such a maybe wide range of cyclists in experience and age, and maybe even fitness goals or training goals. I imagine some might be just perfectly happy to get on the bike and just spin and just move the legs and get the heart rate up a bit or get a bit of a sweat. But for those of us who want to maybe go to another level of training, could we talk about, what is power-based training?
Yeah.
How does that, what is it exactly? Why should we maybe be using that as a...
Well, And funny enough, myself and Mel actually spoke about this a short while ago, and we were talking about obviously the transition and what's happened, especially over the last 12 months, where we've got obviously an enormous amount of people now that are training at home, and they've realised how good indoor cycling can be, what it can do for them. They've invested in a Kaiser bike or in an indoor cycle bike of some kind. The one thing, though, the detrimental area of that is when you go to a gym or when you go to a studio, you've generally got an instructor in front of you that will stand there, maybe even get off their bike and push you and motivate you to be, stronger than you probably, or push harder than you probably would do if you were on your own. Well, you know what, ladies and gentlemen? You're kind of on your own now. You might have your 4K screen with your platform on there, your cycle class, your instructor, but you know what? Without some kind of knowledge or some kind of recognition or data point to understand exactly how hard you're working or how hard you need to work to achieve what you need to achieve, then it's very difficult to guarantee you're going to get value for money out of that bike. And you're quite right. Some people listen, and I'm a great advocate of it. You want to get on a bike, you want to put your favorite pop tunes on, and you just want to ride. That is fantastic. Get on and do it. But, there are a lot of people out there that want to maximize their results from the time they spend on the bike. They don't want to get on there and think they could have done more. If they've got a 40 minutes or a 30 minutes period they want to ride, they want to really make sure that they're on point. And now going back to power and what actually is power, you can imagine me as an elite cyclist. I used to ride for a team called Team Andalucía Cajas in southern Spain. And they were around, I say, very, very quickly after the millennia. So we were using power meters on our bikes right from the first day. So in other words, we were measuring our functional threshold power level, which generally is the amount of power on average our body can produce for 1 hour's hard work. So in other words, it's a general gauge of how much power our energy systems can produce. On average, it's a functional level. It's not a maximal power. It's not an explosive power. It's what our kind of steady state maximum level is when we're on a bike, which is very important for a cyclist to know for two reasons. The first reason, in training, we're only really going to improve that by knowing where that data point, where our limit is. So it's that limit. Now, the reason that limit is important is because if you constantly work below that limit, then generally you're still going to stay fit, but you're not actually going to improve things at a fast rate. You're not going to be able to improve the way your body produces power. In a race, for example, when I'm climbing a mountain 20 kilometers long, I know by looking at my power meter when I'm pushing too hard, because I know when I'm pushing my threshold level of power, I could last 1 hour because I've tested for it. So I know if I go over that, then my time level is limited if I go into what we call the red zones. But those red zones are really important when we're racing, but also when we're in training, because by training above our functional threshold level, we're increasing the capacity of our body. So within the body, we've got three energy systems. We've got our aerobic energy system, we've got our lactate energy system, and we have our anaerobic energy system. Now, all activity on a bike is aerobic. Whether you're working in any one of those three energy systems, we're utilizing oxygen. But when you're at a very low level or a low intensity, generally we're only using oxygen to produce that power. We're not producing the power by using any of our calories, our glycogen within our body, or actually our ADP, ATP system, our endocrine system. So what we need to understand is, where are we and what power are we producing and what energy system are we using to actually create that power? And once we know that, we can specify, like guys like me, profiled classes, which will actually train your aerobic, your lactate, and your anaerobic energy system to its kind of potential to actually get you as fit as you possibly could be. Without that knowledge, you're not going to get there. You're not going to understand, and you're certainly not going to be able to record your progress or see your progress when you're riding your bikes.
So could we talk a bit about the FTP tests? Because as I'm getting into it, you're seeing this talked about a lot. There's different platforms that probably have different tests. Does it matter which one you do? Will they all generally give you the same score if I do one on the M series, like the Kaiser has their own M series app. If I do an FTP test on that one, and then 2 weeks later do one on CicloZone or another, will they generally be the same? But maybe to step back, maybe I don't know if Mel wants to explain this, but yeah, what is the FTP test? Maybe in general, like, what's it going to be like?
If Darren explains what the test is actually is, and then I'll explain about how you then progress your level of fitness, that would probably be the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I think functional threshold power tests actually were created by a pair of sports scientists, a guy called Andrew Coggan and a guy called Hunter Allen, who actually produced the whole theory of power training. This was the very, very late 1980s, early 1990s. And from that stemmed, obviously, the world of power meters, measuring power, et cetera, et cetera. And they created a system based around a single test, which was a 1 hour test on a bike. And this was literally getting on a bike, warming up, and then trying to hit the highest level of power on a bike that you could actually maintain for 1 hour. So it's a case of when you finished your hour, you can hardly get those pedals to go around, anymore at that speed. It's done, it's finished. And your average wattage, your average power measured in watts, is your functional threshold power. Now, based around that, they created actually a 7-zone system. Now, we're not going to talk about the 7 zones because I believe the top 2 zones, zone 6 and zone 7, are kind of more for the elite athletes, the people who really want to specify certain amounts of power and types of power that they're producing in certain quantities for certain periods of time. But for the other 5 zones, for anybody riding a bike who's interested in power, they're kind of critical. We've got zone 1 at the bottom, which is actually between 0 and 55% of that FTP figure. So if your FTP was 200, then obviously between 0 and 110 watts is going to be your zone 1. So that is your active recovery zone. So at this level, your body is hardly activating at all. It's just warming up. It's not actually, in any designated training zone. The training really begins actually in zone 2. Zone 2, designated by a blue zone, that is your endurance zone. Or your aerobic zone. You're almost exclusively aerobic at this point. So for people who are doing long endurance events, then that is the zone that generally you will want to be spending your time in, because kind of your time there is unlimited. It's, people doing long marathons, people doing, long cycle rides, charity rides, these 24-hour events will generally find out when they look back and actually measure their power, they spent almost the entire event in zone 2. Because that's where your body can stay. It's still generating enough power to have an effect on the body, but it's quite simple and easy to stay there.
And Darren, really, what percentage would that be around? If you said level 1 was 0 to 55?
56% to 75% of your FTP is purely aerobic. Okay. And that is the blue zone. And these zonal colors are the same throughout all of the flat platforms you'll find on any, cycle training system anywhere in the world. There'll always be these colors because they're based on the original colors kind of laid out by Andrew Coggan and Hunter Allen. Zone 3, which is when you progress past that 75% mark. Now at that point, and these are physiological, kind of scientifically proven kind of effects on the human body, your body will now start to engage much more muscle mass at this point. So what it will start to do, it starts to produce lactic acid. And your body has the job then of removing this lactic from the muscles. And this is your lactic energy system, your lactate energy system. And this begins in zone 3. And this is between 75% and 90%. So your lactate energy system begins at that point, and that's when we can start to talk about working on strength, on muscle mass, on the way the muscles actually work and the way our body deals with lactic acid. So it's a great training zone to be in if you're looking to produce power or create a more powerful body. After 90%, we then get into that zone where we tested for. This is your threshold level zone, zone 4. It's the yellow zone or the slightly light orange zone, depending on what platform you're on. But it's the zone where you start to reach both aerobic and lactate threshold levels of power. So in other words, at this point, you know, you're not going to be able to hold a conversation for very long. You're not going to, you know, you're not going to be comfortable on the bike at this point. It starts to get quite hard work. However, we all know that if you're working on a tested FTP figure, you could hold that zone for 1 hour. I mean, it's going to really, it's the limit, but you could hold that. So to do a 4 or 5 minute segment in yellow zone is quite within the human body, or, you know, working on your power level, it's quite within your capabilities to do that in a class. So that's really, really, really easy. And for the first part of understanding how power training works is to understand that you should have confidence when you go into that yellow zone that you can easily do that. It's not going to be comfortable, but you can do it. You can do it. And then anything over, between 90 and 105% of your FTP. Anything over 105% of your FTP, it goes into what we call your red zones. It starts in VO2 max. Then you've got zone 6 and 7 at 120% and 150%. But you know what? In my opinion, for most people riding bikes at this level, anything over that 105%, once you get into the red zones, you're really going to feel the benefit. But the problem you've got is once you hit red, your time there is limited. The higher you go into the red, the shorter time you can spend there. Yeah. So as soon as you get into those red zones, you know, intervals of 1 minute, 1 minute and a half, maybe even 2 minutes, that's going to be really hard. And the most important part of power training is not actually hitting the zones that an instructor may ask you to hit. It's listening to what that instructor says when we want to recover. It's the recovery that's important, not rest. It's recovery. And which zone below zone 4 are we actually going to be asked to recover in? Because the benefits are equally as good in recovery as they are actually hitting those performance intervals. So once you understand how long can we stay in each zone, how long in a class could we stay in each interval, and how long do we have to recover in our blue zones or recover in our green zones, for example, before we can ask you to go down again? That is where the value of a really great instructor is.
Yeah, for sure.
Being able to create, when talking about power, if you're going to be asking people to work on a functional threshold power level, it's having an instructor that will push you to the limit, but not push you too far. And it needs an understanding of power and an understanding how that power needs to be put into a class. Hence the reason when I was setting up CicloZone, you know, I only approached people to teach for me who had the understanding of how to create classes and how to put those intervals, and the importance of recovery, as well as the importance of those intervals. Now, we talk about the motivator. We've got him online here, Mr. Thomas, who, if anybody's done any of his classes, will know he is an absolute specialist in getting that over to you. The importance of pushing to those red, but also the importance of bringing it back down again afterwards. Mel's a specialist in insanity classes as well. So I'm going to hand over to Mel now and let him kind of make that relationship between what he does with his insanity hit classes and also what he does in, for example, his challenge classes on the CicloZone platform. So away you go, Mel. Take it away, sir.
The big thing is, and I say to people who are trying to improve their levels of fitness, is if you always do what you always did, you always get what you've always got. So if you never push yourself out of that comfort zone, you'll always stay there. So if you're always sitting, whatever training you're doing, whether it's you're lifting weights, whether you're running, whether you're swimming, whatever it is, and it's like when you go to the swimming pool and you see the people just going up the pool, down the pool, and they're constantly doing that same pace all the time. Or in an indoor cycling class, you'll be teaching a class, or you'll go into a class, and you'll see the people that will do the same levels all the time, and that's fine if that's what they want to achieve. But it's when they approach you and they say, I can't improve my levels of fitness, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I don't seem to be improving my levels of fitness. And that's why they're not improving, because they're not pushing themselves out of their comfort zones. And one of the big things at the moment we've got at the moment, well, I say we because I've just retired from the service within the police services, is our fitness test, the actual fitness test itself. And a lot of people have been unsuccessful with that fitness test because a lot of it is down to comfort zones. And what's happening is when the heart rate increases, we know what the body will do. It will release those chemicals. And these are the chemicals that most of the people sat on this webinar get addicted to. We love it. We love it when that adrenaline kicks in, when that cortisol kicks in, when that dopamine kicks in, and all of a sudden we're on that high and we're blasting away and we're hitting those red zones, and then we're coming back and we've hit that red zone. We think, you know what, I can't do that again. You come back into the blue and you go, I'm ready for the next one, because you get addicted to that feeling. You get addicted to that sensation. And then the next time you come back for the next session, you look at your heart rate, you're working in an even better zone, because it's all about stats. It's all about performance. It's all about pushing yourself to that higher level. But going back to that fitness test, what's happening with officers and applicants is their bodies are releasing this chemical, and they're going, and they get stressed out, and then they stop. They'll stop because they don't know what that effect is, what the body will naturally do to throw those chemicals in to make them work harder. And it's about understanding the body, and understanding the body, that the body does this as a natural process. So when you're there and you've pushed really hard, and everyone's had that first time on a spin bike, no one can tell me they've not had it, where you're looking at that instructor, you go, oh my gosh, what are you doing to me? But then for whatever reason, the next week you go, I'm going back. And you go back and you keep going back and you keep going back, because your scores get better, your fitness gets better, you're able to cope with the stress and the strains that you're putting your body under. And all of a sudden, their running gets better, their swimming gets faster in the pool, they get more efficient, the core's more engaged, and it's because of that fitness, because you are putting yourself in that red zone. You're taking your heart rate 85-90% plus of that maximum that you're working in, and that's where you're getting the gains. And unless you're prepared to do that, unless you're prepared to take your body into that area, you won't get the gains that you can achieve. And that's what it's about. And it's also about taking your body into it, but then bringing it back and allowing the body sufficient time to recover. Don't get me wrong, and I do call it that. Sometimes do something special in a workout. Sometimes I won't allow people to come all the way back down, because even in competition, you'll get, and my competition, one of my competitions was boxing. In boxing, when you're there and you've got somebody in a position where, you know what, you're going in for the kill and you need to keep up that intensity, you're there and your heart rate goes, and it's as if you sometimes miss a beat, because you're working so hard and your heart rate is at maximum, that you've got to keep going, because the brain's now saying, if you don't, you're going to lose. And even with anybody within your training, whatever training you'll do, you'll be there going, I don't want to let go of this. I'm going to keep pushing you, but that's where you get the gains. It's not about breaking someone. It's about pushing yourself to your limits.
For too long, Daniel, I think we've been told by our gyms, by our PTs, for our gym instructors, for a long time, that you can stay relatively fit and you can keep the weight off and you can grow old with a good, healthy, a good amount of fitness by just going into the gym and walking on a treadmill, or just, doing the general things. Because I think gyms were too scared to push people too hard, because they thought it was going to frighten them. But what we've kind of learned is that people have got fed up with the mediocrity of paying month on month for gym memberships and not seeing any improvement. And the birth of studios in London, for example, boutique cycle studios and HIIT studios, and all their aim is to get people in for short periods of time and hit them really, really hard. And these guys have seen incredible changes in their body. And this is why, going back to why cycling is so great, because, I'm 50 years old now. Mel's a couple of years older than me. I'm sure Mel has the same as I do. I sometimes go into special cycle races when I'm here, and I see guys who are 20 years my junior, and they'll sometimes come up to me and say, how are you 50? What? And literally, I have to analyze, therefore, my own training, my own life. And I put my body through, you could say, hell for the best part of like 15, 18 years on a bike. And yet I'm here at 50 without an ache or a pain, no problems physically, very, very strong heart. I've got a metabolic age of something like 30, 31. And I have to just look at, I haven't got a very careful diet. I generally eat what I want when I want. I don't go too mad on anything, very, very kind of across the board. But I just looked when I was, in Spain and coming to the end of my career cycling, I generally looked at the science of cycling and not only figured out that it's great for cyclists, but you know what? anything you do on a bike, if you can bear in consideration the way cyclists train, from the bike setup to the power to the way we train in profiles, because it's a low impact form of exercise, it's something you can do all of your life. It's something you can enjoy when you're 20 and still be doing it when you're 80. And I don't know whether anybody, I'm sure Mel's heard me say this before, but I did a lot of studies through my journey through sports science and doing S&C coaching. And I heard a very important guy in Dutch football, actually, who's one of the S&C coaches for PSV Eindhoven. And he stood up and he gave a seminar talking about sportsmen as they age. And he said that as you get older, between the ages of 20 and 60 years old, you only lose 20% of your metabolic strength. So in other words, if you could squat or bench press 100 kilos when you were 20, there's a pretty good chance you're going to squat or bench press, if you keep relatively fit, 80 kilos when you're 60 years old. But over the same period of time, you lose 80% of your metabolic speed. So in other words, you slow down. Now, if you look at the equation for power, it's force multiplied by velocity. So in other words, if you're only losing 20% of your force over a 40-year period, but you're losing 80% of your velocity, the speed at which you work, then what we have there is a kind of a balance that's not representative of the way we're being asked to work in gyms all over the world, which is all mass-based weight training. Yeah. And weight training is very important for the body, don't get me wrong, but we're not actually identifying the fact that most of our muscle speed starts in the brain. And it's the speed at which the neurons fire from the brain into the legs and make the muscles fire as you actually work, or your muscles in your arms, how fast you move. And cycling is an incredible way of not only being able to train for strength, but because it's a functional power, there's a lot of speed in it as well. Mm-hmm. And the way those muscles work when you ride a bike mean that a lot of the stuff that's Mel talking about, we can push you as instructors really, really hard. But we are pretty safe in the knowledge that because it's a low impact form of exercise, we're not going to hurt anybody. We're staying well within the boundaries of hurting somebody. We're doing all the good with none of the risk. And so Mel's an expert. I used to teach it as well, an expert insanity instructor. And insanity is an incredible form of exercise. It's very effective because it's 2 minutes of literally red zone work. Followed by, a minute of recovery, and then you go again. So it's repeated. So it's recover, hit it hard, recover, hit it hard. Now, if you look at some of our cycle classes, we go red zone, blue zone, red zone, blue zone. And the intervals are there exactly the same as an insanity class because it has the same effect. The difference between insanity is you've got your feet in contact with the ground. So when you jump off the ground and you land, gravity is going to put all that weight on your legs and your joints, your connective tissues of your knees, your hips, and your ankles. So you're getting all the good, but there is a slight risk to what you're doing, when you start your body connected with the floor.
And I think the big thing is, what I find, and I don't know if anybody else finds this, is it amazes me how, especially females who do a lot of indoor cycling, look younger. They look younger than their ages because when you're pushing them and they find it so enjoyable, and I know one lady who contacted me I've not seen her for years, and she contacted me when I retired, and she said, remember that first spin class? She was actually on a rowing machine outside the studio, and I said to her, have you ever tried spin? And she went, it scares me. They were her words, it scares me. I said, come and try it once and see what you think. And literally, she got hooked on it. And she would walk out, and it was this typical stereotypical walk into the gym looking really dolled up, hair back, hair in place, everything else. She'd walk out and she'd look like the Joker with her makeup running down her face, her hair everywhere and everything else. And she said, that day, that was like the light bulb moment for me. And she must be in her mid-60s, and her body is absolutely amazing. And it is that that correlation of, like she says, it takes my heart rate up to maximum. But she says she has a resting heart rate of around 48. Yeah. For a woman of that age to have that level of resting heart rate is amazing. And like I say, when you go back to my parents' generation, you would never have had parents, people of that age doing things like indoor cycling at that level, CrossFit. HIIT training, all this kind of stuff. But now when you see this generation now, they see it that fitness is for everyone, and it keeps you young, and especially with indoor cycling, because as Darren says, there's none of that impact. That is one of the big things with insanity. With any kind of HIIT training, when I'm doing my burpees and tuck jumps, I jump up and I'm landing in that squat position. It is high impact. I recognize that. And it does help individuals as we get older, because we know that the bones are benefited from keeping that impact, especially with females doing some kind of impact training because of osteoporosis and stuff like that. But what we have to be mindful of is the connective tissue as well, because we're getting older and we have to take care of that as well. And that's where I say to some of the participants, I just do that, just keep it down, bring it down, because you've got to be aware of injury. You've got to be aware of, those tendons are getting older. But it's all about staying active. It's all about, looking after that body. It's all about looking after that engine. And if you look after that engine, as I call it, the heart, it's like any car. You put the right fuel in, you run it right, you take it through the gears, it looks after itself. And that's, for me, what indoor cycling is about. You're able to take it through the gears, take it through the levels, but without the impact element of what you're doing.
And also, just to go further with regards to what Mel was saying, that means that effectively what we're telling people is that you're never too old, A, to start indoor cycling, or to even think about doing indoor cycling with power. Because you've got to remember, a functional threshold power test is individual to the rider. So I can take a 65, 70-year-old man and put him on a bike for the first time and do a functional threshold power test with him. It's
all relative, and he'll be working at his level.
Like I'm saying, when I'm doing the class, you could have Chris Froome, who's one of the most powerful functional cyclists in the world, and you can have, Mrs. Brown, mother of three, in the same class. When I say hit yellow zone, yes, Chris Froome is hitting 400 watts, and Mrs. Brown might be hitting 120 watts. But do you know what? Physiologically, they're both experiencing exactly the same thing. Absolutely. So they're actually getting the same benefit, and they're actually able to hold that power level individually for the same amount of time. And that's the reason why we now don't use the 1 hour test for the majority, because we have so many people who are not cyclists using bike now to keep themselves fit, healthy through the entirety of their lives. So that we now have a variance of tests. We've got a 20-minute test. We've also got ramp tests. But the most popular one, and I think probably the best one, is the simple 5-minute test. Because as you alluded to before, Daniel, we're talking about percentages of zones where we have a certain amount of leeway. So we do have a little bit of scope for, not mistakes, but not being so specific on our functional threshold power. So what we like to do is the 5-minute test is very simply, it's a 5-minute test, pushing as hard as you can. But because it's not for the full hour, all we do is we subtract roughly 15% from the average you push for that 5 minutes. And that will give you a relative figure to what you would have pushed if you'd have pushed for the full hour. We kind of think that you're going to drop at least 15% of your average over the remaining 55 minutes. It's been proven to be very, very close. It's not far at all. Yeah. And that is why it's important. Just one of the quick anecdotes, what Mel was saying. I obviously do a lot of cycling on the road, and I've got a couple of velo groups that I go out with regularly, especially through the spring and summer. And these velo groups are huge numbers of riders. I mean, the motorists hate us here in the UK, because when we go out, we kind of block the roads. They hate us. They just can't get by. But you know what? We go out, we'll do, 100 to 130 kilometers around the lovely, beautiful countryside of Leicestershire and Warwickshire here in the UK. And we've got guys in this group that are, yes, in their early 20s, mid 20s. We've also got guys in their 30s, in their 40s. And we've got guys in their 50s and their 60s, but we've also got guys in the 70s and their 80s. And when we're in our peloton and we're pushing up those hills and we're hitting this hard, you know what? It's not the 60s and 70-year-olds and the 80-year-olds who are lagging behind. They're the guys at the front, literally showing the young lads exactly how to do it. And that's what makes me amazed. And I've done this for years. And I always thought, there's something to this cycling as you get older. If you maintain it and do it right, you really can, as Mel said, keep your youth, grow old with a certain amount of, and it's not about growing old. It's not all about aesthetics. For me, it's about that word balance. If you ride a bike correctly, you balance the muscle groups between the anterior chain and the posterior chain of the legs. Now, I asked a sports scientist, what is the problem with living under gravity, for example, every day of our lives, and exercising under gravity in a standard format? And he said the problem is the human body becomes very quad dominant, which means we have a dominant muscle, which is our quad, our anterior chain, the front chain of the legs. And if you got over tension or too much tension in that anterior chain of the leg and a lack of tension in the posterior chain, there are three main physical ailments that the human body will suffer from. That's lower back pain, hip problems, and knee problems. And then he went back to say the three most prominent causes or problems that the human body suffers as they get over the age of 50 and 60 is lower back pain, knee pain, and hip pain. And then going back to the group that I go riding with, it's not only on the bike that these older guys and older girls actually, impress me. It's when we do the coffee stop and they get off the bike and they march into the coffee shop, beautiful posture, walking around with the activity and motion of a person 20, 30 years younger than them. They are active, they've got good reaction speed, they don't look old, and they stand bolt upright. They've got beautiful balance to their body. And it's just through years of cycling. All I want to do is make people understand that if you cycle correctly on your indoor bike, you've got so much to gain. So much to gain.
Can we talk a bit then about just the programming, if in terms of maybe people that are maybe getting into cycling, getting into their training, how much should I be doing? How often should I be doing it? Should I have rest days? I've, been seeing stuff about recovery rides. So, should there be something that we should be thinking about it in terms of, okay, how do I want to lay out my week of riding? Is there even a certain focus that we should have? HIIT class, or I'll do an endurance day, a sprint day, or even wondering too, like you said, I mean, these older cyclists they're talking about, I'm sure they're doing their cycling, but the supplementary stuff as well, the stretching, what type of weight training is necessary? I know, Darren, maybe in a previous conversation, we did talk about how like the importance of strengthening the hamstrings, which are maybe get less focus. So maybe we could talk briefly about that. I am looking at the time too, but I mean, I don't mind going a little over too, but we'll try and cover this and then maybe quickly touch on the nutrition and recovery. But
yeah, I'll just go
programming briefly.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I mean, Mel will jump in, I'm sure, at this as well. I mean, as a cyclist, as a pro cyclist, generally, we didn't want to put on too much weight, too much mass, because we're climbing mountains. So we didn't do a lot of weight training. But the one areas we did concentrate on was core, lower back, and those hamstring areas. So we did do a lot of squat work. We did do a lot of core work on the floor, and we did a hell of a lot of deadlifts. A cyclist who doesn't do deadlifts is missing a trick. Because I just said to you, your body is quad dominant by nature. And we need to do everything in our power to engage those hamstrings when you're rotating. So when you rotate a pedal around, when you go down the forward phase, obviously you're pushing with your quads, you're pushing from your hip flexors, you're beginning the push with your glutes. As you hit the 6 o'clock position at the bottom, you got to remember the left foot, if that's the right foot, the left foot starts to push. Now it's very easy, therefore, to forget about the right foot. But it's not the way a cyclist works. We then start to pull using our hamstrings, and also at the top starting to engage our glutes very early on before we reach to the top point. So those hamstrings and glutes become very, very important. So the best way of really supplementing cycling, other than any training anybody's doing from an aesthetic point of view, is definitely for concentrating on the core work, the deadlifts, the squats, lunges, those kind of compound exercises that are just build core strength within the whole body. And that kind of work is kind of imperative. Going back to your planning of classes, before I'll hand over to Melanie, can jump in a little bit more onto that supplementary training, because I know he's a specialist in that area. when I'm riding, when you're doing classes, the general rule of thumb is you can ride 7 days a week if you want to, but nobody can ride full out all of the time. That would be just like asking you to do a sprint race every day. It's just not going to happen. A lot of people like to have a day off. A lot of people like to go and do, say, a session of deadlifts, session of lunges, session of squats as their day off, something a little bit different, a little bit less aerobic. But if you do like your bike, you must remember that generally the rule of thumb is 2 hard classes back to back if you've done really, really well. If your performance is good in those classes and you don't feel tired, that's great. Maybe you could push to a 3rd. But for most people, after 2 hard classes, what is required is what we call a recovery ride. Now, recovery ride is a ride where generally we don't go into our or above our threshold level of power. Just keep it in the blue zone, the green zone, zone 2 and zone 3. Keep the legs working, but certainly don't take that your energy systems to the level they would be. Within the CicloZone platform ourselves, this is our core element that we've been working on now. The platform is there, it's up and running, but in the background, myself and the development team have been working night and day to create what will be the most unique class recommendation and class metric data analysis system that any platform will have in the world of indoor cycling. So what we're going to do is, for anybody who's connected to our app, whether it be heart rate or cadence or on power and cadence, we're going to take that data and we're going to formulate an algorithm from your data, which tells me exactly what cadence you are riding at in every single interval. And did you achieve the power averages in that interval at the correct cadence? And if you did, that's a plus, that's fantastic, that's 100% perfect. But if you created the power, but it was at the incorrect cadence because you couldn't maintain, for example, the 85 to 90 RPM, for example, you decided to drop it down and increase a gear, you're still pushing the correct cadence, you won't quite get that 100% score. So what we'll do is we're analyzing that, and every one of our classes is profiled with what we call a COL value, this COL, this CicloZone output level. And what we do is we compare your results with all of the COL levels of all of the classes. Those COL levels are created on a basis of cadence and intensity. And if you've been successful in your previous class, we will recommend you a slightly more difficult class. And you can try that next. And if you're still successful in that, we'll recommend you a more difficult class. And you'll see how far you can go. But sooner or later, you're going to do a class where you're going to fall well short. And then we will ask you to do a recovery ride. Now, if you continue to be successful in all of the classes, eventually we're going to recommend you do another FTP test because you become more powerful and we need you to test yourself. So that kind of philosophy can be carried out by anybody, even if you're riding on a free ride. Go hard, work hard, but the first element you find yourself not being able to achieve what you set yourself out to achieve, it's recovery ride or rest. And then maybe come back to it again, maybe a day later or 2 days later, and then go back into the same kind of scenario. And that's the way kind of training should be laid out. Being able to drop the bike for a while and jump off and go into a squat rack, doing some of these weights. But I'm going to hand over to Mel now because he knows the importance of that and what effect that has on the human body and how that helps you cycle. So I'll just
and the big thing is making sure that you get the right program, because what you're finding, and a lot of people, it's all about the look. Darren's already mentioned about people doing everything at the front, so where the people have problems in the hips, knees and back, and ankles. But a lot of the times it's because everything's done at the front. People don't really focus on what's behind them because they can't see what's behind them. So when you see people that are doing lots of arm curls, but they're not doing their triceps, they're doing a lot of squats, but they're not doing their hamstrings or their glutes. And that's where you get the imbalance with muscles. Same with abs, doing a lot of sit-ups, a lot of ab stuff, but they're not doing anything at the back. The core is the core. It's not just the front, it's also the back as well. And it's getting that right balance for what you want to do. So when you're cycling, you want to just do a one rep squat and that's it. You'd also do other things with higher reps as well, whether it's 12 to 15 reps as well. So what I would say is you need to make sure that you get the right program for what you want to achieve. Because if you are a say for instance a bike sprinter, you'd be training completely different from someone who was doing an endurance competition as well.
Absolutely.
For me, with indoor cycling and it's worked right for me. It's worked right for the people that I've advised. It's quite interesting. I was actually finding a message I was sent a couple of weeks ago from someone, 50 plus lady, and her comments were she did 30 miles on her road bike. It's the first ride she did outdoors this year. She felt stronger and she felt like she could carry on going, and that's from what she was doing from the rides that we've been putting on, because she's had to hold those gears. She's had to hold those yellow zones. She's gone into those red zones. We've brought her back out the red zones and allowed her to recover. Then we've taken her back up again. But because she's been holding that level of intensity, she can then transfer that onto her road bike, into that performance, into her swimming as well. She's knocking times off her swimming as well, because as she says, because you're taking me into my maximum heart rate, now I'm swimming and I'm working in my maximum heart rate. It's making it a lot easier for her to be able to cope with the load that she's putting her body on. So what I say to people is, one, use a really good PT or get really good advice. Two, when you're working, make sure you are working opposite. So with those quads, if you're on a bike for 45 minutes and you're trying to get the best performance you can get on your bike 45 minutes, as Darren said, don't just concentrate on the drive down, the drive phase, also concentrate on that pull. Because if I'm pushing these triceps, I want to pull those biceps. So I want balance on both sides. So again, when you're working with weights, don't just concentrate on your squats. So if you're doing reps of 4 times 15 squats, you should be doing 4 times 15 on your hamstrings. You should be doing 4 times 15 on your biceps. Same on your triceps, because everything should be balanced. You've got to make sure that you've got all-round balance on whatever you're doing. You've got to have that balance.
Yeah, neuromuscular power on a bike accounts for the majority of the power that is produced by professional cyclists. Professional cyclists don't have huge muscles on their legs. Okay, the power indoor cyclists, they obviously have large muscles because it's all explosive power. But endurance cyclists produce incredible amounts of functional power, yet they do it from muscles that are actually very, very small compared to the average male or the average female quad and hamstring and glute, for example. And they do this by the way they recruit the muscles in the pedal rotation. But that gives you beautiful balance over the joints, from the hip joint to the knee joint to the ankles. So if you just want to keep in a good state of fitness and health and to stave off those injuries that hit us when we're in our 50s and our 60s and our 70s, you know, try to stay balanced. Learn how to ride that bike correctly, and obviously the action of riding a bike. Forgetting about the power for a second, but the activity of riding a bike is so critical. This is why we pay so much attention with CicloZone with the cadence side of things. There's something else I just want to add into this, and while we're at this point, I think it's really apt, is the fact that there are 2 ways your muscle works. You have something called the intensity of contraction, and you also have something called the rate of contraction. 2 ways your muscles work. The intensity of contraction is actually intensified by, for example, as Mel was saying, a 1 rep max. Maximum weight, 1 repetition, maximizing the intensity in the muscles that you're working. And yet the rate of contraction is increased by actually doing lighter weights, but doing them quicker, doing them faster. Now, both of these things are important. And this is why when you look at a bike, we have a cadence range. So we'll ask you sometimes to hit red zone, and I'm sure if you've done any of Mel's classes, you've done both of these, is to hit your red zones at 60, 65 RPM. Now you might be pushing 250, 300 watts, but you're doing it at 60, 65 RPM, and you're creating that power through the intensity of contraction. This is strength endurance work. Yet on the same piece of equipment in the same class, Mel might ask you to try and hit 300 watts, your red zone, at 100 to 110 RPM. This is not being created by intensity of contraction. This is all about neuromuscular speed now. This is all about the rate of contraction and how fast your muscles can fire. Now, remember me telling you that between the ages of 20 and 60, you lose 80% of your speed. Yet the majority of indoor cycle classes, up until we started talking about power and real cyclists started getting involved in indoor cycling, were done around that base beat of 60, 65 beats per minute, which is that electronic dance music beat. It's that Ibiza sound, that clubland boom, 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 60 to 65 RPM, because that was the music that people were riding to. But what they have to realize is that that's not really the best speed to be riding a bike. It is if you're 120 kilos and you want to stand out of the saddle and use your body weight to push down on the pedals, but that's not really doing you any good. What that guy really needs to do is to sit down and create that high power at 80 to 85 to 90 RPM to stimulate the speed at which his brain is firing those muscle patterns through his legs. And therefore, if he can do that over a period of time as he gets older, he won't lose that 80% of speed as he gets towards 60 years old. And therefore will actually be a more active, a more mobile, a more balanced human being as he gets into his older age. So those things are really important. The cadence that you create the power on is just as important as the power itself, because it indicates, as Mel was saying, with the way you work between, you know, slow and heavy if you're a sprinter, because you want to produce that maximal power, or the endurance guys, more repetitions with lighter weights. Well, think about what I've just said. Heavy weights, you know, heavy resistance, slow RPM, there's your strength work. It's exactly the same as you are when you're in the gym and doing squats. We do lighter resistance, but faster work, more repetitions to create the power in a different way and create that balance. That seems to be the buzzword of the evening, I think, the balance of the body.
Yeah, I was just going to say, talking about balance, we know, well, having a good, like, balanced diet is key to our fitness and overall health. Are there like key, maybe like nutrition tips for cycling or good ideas for like a pre or post workout meal or what to do?
It's quite interesting. People talk about pre-exercise meals and things like that. I've had people who say, should I carb up before I do a spin class? Well, you can imagine you're carving up before a spin class. So you're putting all this food in this thing that needs blood to digest, and then people wonder why they don't feel sick, or they don't feel comfortable, or they don't have a great session because they've carved up. Now, when you speak to professional athletes, they'll say to you, when I go out training, I don't carb up. So when I'm actually going to perform, I don't carb up. Why? Because one meal is not going to win you a race, is it?
No.
It's about the training. It's about consistency, frequency, intensity. That's it. But the consistency comes in what you actually do in your actual preparation for what you're going to do. So the whole carbon up thing, you don't need to. Your body's carrying enough energy within your body to be able to get on a bike at 6:30.
A good diet over your whole day, every day of the week.
Exactly.
Okay, is exactly what you're looking for, and it's a balance. People said to me, I go out. I've done, even in my late 40s, 300-kilometer races, 150-mile races here in the UK, up some of the biggest mountains in the UK and in Spain. And people say to me, God, what did you eat to get up those mountains? Exactly the same thing I ate when I was at home just doing an hour on my spin bike, because I'm creating my body to do that kind of thing every day. If I told you, and people say to me, I've said in the past, should I have loads of carbs an hour before a race? I said, you can do, but it's going to take up to 6 hours for your body to turn that carb into energy. So if you're going to carb up for a race, you're going to have to eat those carbs 5 or 6 hours before you start your race for it to have any effect whatsoever. And if I then told you that a lot of cyclists, we don't actually eat a lot of carbs, because I wouldn't say we're keto, but we certainly promote our body for eating body fat as a fuel, because body fat is a smaller quantity of body fat can produce a lot more energy for a longer period of time than, for example, carbohydrates that we eat, such as potatoes, rice, and pasta, for example. So it's a balance, and it really is. So nutrition shouldn't be specifically about your cycling. I think if you're failing on the bike, it's probably not because you've got a terrible diet. It's generally you're probably not only failing on the bike, but you're probably going to fail at everything else. The nutrition shouldn't be for riding a bike; it should be for your powering your day generally.
Yes. Your general health, absolutely.
I generally, for clients that I've always spoke to them and say, instead of eating you know, large meals, breakfast, lunch, and evening meal, smaller meals, but eat 5 or 6 times a day. So a meal at breakfast, good snack middle of the morning, a good lunch, you know, a snack middle of the afternoon, and then don't go crazy in the evening. Because if you put 3,000 calories through your mouth in the evening, and I've just told you that all those carbs are going to become available to you in about 5 or 6 hours. Well, if you have your evening meal at 6 o'clock, in 6 hours, it's midnight and most people are in bed. So what does your body do? What does your body do with all of those calories? Well, it has to store them as body fat, because that's where they got to get. There's nowhere else they can go. So from my point of view, it's just a balance, you know, to eating. Don't eat big meals, smaller meals more often. And there is no do or don't eat or don't eat. You know, everything in moderation really will create a great environment for the vast majority. If you then get to a level where you are going to compete, you do want to do something quite amazing, then yes, you can start going to a personal trainer or a nutritionist, say, I've got an event in 6 weeks, and they'll put you on a 6-week plan to make sure you're optimized for that 6 weeks. But, you know, for people who are training 4 or 5 times a week on an indoor cycle bike, you know, your nutrition needs to be just balanced. Don't think you can eat something an hour before that's going to make you produce an extra 30 watts of power. It doesn't work. Post class as well, just try. The only tip I would say, try not to throw sugar down your throat straight after a session.
Yeah,
the worst thing you can do,
be really well hydrated.
Water and more water and
water. Absolutely.
Yeah, your body
and Darren said the big thing, you know, people do not realize how useful body fat is. Because if you had carbohydrates, it's going to give you, what do they say, 5 calories of energy from a gram of carbohydrates, where you're going to get 9 calories of energy from a gram of fat. So it's like putting aviation fuel in your car and driving it. You are going to be super powered. So for me personally, and again, it's something that's worked for clients, everything else, grains and nuts. You know, especially, you know, if you're using good vegetable fat as energy, there's times when I literally feel supercharged because I'm using grains and nuts as energy rather than the old thoughts of, oh, I need a jacket potato or I need some carbs. I actually use grains and nuts now because I've realized I work a lot better from animal fat than I do from carbs.
The whole of the entire Andalusia Caja cycle racing team were fueled almost entirely on every single training ride and raced by the almonds that we took directly off the trees off all of the land around us in the area where I lived. What we used to do was soak them in salted water and put them out in the sun, and it used to evaporate and it used to leave the salt. So we have salted almonds. And we used to fill our pockets full of salted almonds. And when we were away, we just put some almonds in our mouth. All we used to do was snack on salted almonds. That was it all the time. And the amount of miles and kilometers my legs achieved on those salted almonds was incredible. So yeah, grains and nuts. Fantastic. Yeah.
Amazing. What I think I'll do is let me open it up to questions from people that are with us, to either you know, you could put it in the chat if you'd like to give a question, or I mean, if you want to as well. If you haven't used Zoom, I believe if you click on participants, I think the little arrow, is it participants or maybe reaction? There's a way to raise your hand. Maybe it's under chat.
I've got some questions in the chat.
But yeah, we could look at the chat and see if there's some questions. We'll take those. Oh yeah, there's one here from Raul. I'd like to know what type of training to do from Monday to Saturday based on what is in the CicloZone.
That's it. I mean, that's generally Raul. It's good to. Hola, Raul. ¿Qué tal, amigo? ¿Está bien? Okay. Ahora, no habla en español no más. Ahora en inglés. We have this coal value. So what you can do, for example, you're starting the week, you're probably going to be looking at hitting coal values of around about 70, 75, 76%. And once you do a successful class at 76%, then maybe try one a little bit better, you know, more percentage coal, until you start to feel that's too much of your FTP. And once you reach a level that is difficult for you to achieve, then it's time then to probably take a step down to one of the lower classes or take a free ride and try and make sure you hit that free ride for a 40-45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, but stay in your blue and your green zones. So put your own tunes on and use that recovery ride to get you back. And then the next day you can come back super strong. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Raul. Kathy had a question. Can you say again about loss of speed with age and how to maintain fitness?
Yeah, the loss of speed, it's something that we all suffer from as we get older. If we become more sedimentary, and the mobility we lose as we get older physically as our bodies degrade, means that the big area that power is fundamental to our performance. I mean, to the point of fact now, even if we look at something that we cyclists, we are very pre-concerned with, is watts per kilo. Okay, it's the amount of power your body produces per kilo of body weight. So what we're trying to do is keep that wattage, that per kilo of body weight, up around the 2.5 mark is great. Anything higher than that's fantastic. But if you can keep your average power mark at around that 2 watts per kilo, 2.5 watts per kilo, that's brilliant. Now the problem is, as we get older, that power starts to decrease, but it doesn't decrease because we become weak. When I did my seminars all over the world, I used to start my seminars when we started talking about power and age. And I used to say, has anybody ever tried to wrestle their grandfather? Was their grandfather a weak old man? No, most grandfathers are super strong. They'll pin you down at 18, 19 and you won't be able to get away from them. You know, if they get you in a headlock, you can't get away. They're not, but if you ask them to chase you around the park, for example, they're not going to be able to do it. Exactly. They're not going to do it. And that's because it's the speed element, the agility, the mobility element that's missing. And this is something I've tried to address with CicloZone, because the classes, and I've had a lot of people say, oh, your classes, a lot of them are 85 to 90 RPM. And I'm saying, so that's discomfort. That's not comfortable for you to do. And the reason is because you've already started that journey to slowing down. And your training is not actually starting to reverse that journey. We need to start to pedal that bike at what we call in the cycling world at our optimal pace. Now, when you're riding a bike with power, what we as cyclists understand is something called metabolic cost. Now, I've already spoken to you about strength endurance training, which is the slow pace with the heavy gear. And I've talked to you about the high pace stuff on the lower gear, and the fact that you can create red zone power, one of those two extremes. Now, the problem is, if I went for a long time on red zone, for example, on a high resistance and low pace, I will fail because my legs will create too much lactic acid and I won't be able to get rid of the lactic acid. And that is what's called metabolic cost. The metabolic cost to me riding on a heavy gear and riding slowly is the fact my muscles will produce excess lactic acid. On the other end of the spectrum, if I'm riding very quickly on a lower resistance but higher RPM, my metabolic cost is much more aerobic based. So in other words, I'm going to start to fail because my body can't deliver enough oxygen to my legs to keep me going at that pace. So what we tend to find is cyclists always settle, all professional cyclists, they settle at between 85 and 95 RPM all of the time, because that is the area in which our bodies are optimally producing the most amount of functional power for the minimal metabolic cost. In other words, you burn more calories, you burn more power, you create more power for less metabolic cost, which means you can go for longer, harder at that cadence. Hence the reason a lot of the classes with CicloZone do have good areas of 85 to 90 RPM work, because we're trying to emulate what millions of cyclists already understand, which is that riding at that pace is very, very good for the body and very good for our engine. So it's good for producing power. So speed element, when we start to work our legs faster, and it doesn't mean working at full speed, it's about just pedaling slightly quicker and holding it there for a longer period of time. Now, for some, it's quite uncomfortable to do to begin with, but actually as you do it more, it actually becomes your preferred cadence. I mean, I think we've got a member actually on the CicloZone members group, and I think he's a member of the Kaiser M3I users group as well, Tony Robinson. And Tony is a cyclist from outdoors, but didn't really understand the cadence side of things. And when he first started with CicloZone, really was finding it tough to be at that 85 to 90 RPM. but actually stuck with it. And now he finds it's his go-to pace for creating power when he's on the road. If he's climbing a little hill or he's climbing a mountain, whatever he's doing, he's trying to hit those 85 to 90 RPM rides. And it's all through what his body has learned from training like that. So Kathy, just to let you know that is exactly what you need to do. Not just ride fast, but ride fast with intensity. Create your power at that 85 to 90, 95 RPM kind of pace. Even on your free rides, it'll serve you really well. Really well.
And even when, and Kathy will tell you, even when she does the rides with me, we're varying those cadences. So some weeks we'll go 80 to 90. We might go a bit lower sometimes, but it's varying it all the time. But we're keeping that intensity up, or we're keeping those cadences up as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Just to add, Kathy added just another question to that. My legs usually fail before my heart lung capacity struggles. Is that lactic acid?
What fails first? Yeah, legs. Yeah.
Yeah, just my legs usually fail before.
That's lactic acid. That's just muscle endurance, and you know that's something you can build up over time. The good thing you've got is that, and I would say to somebody, you're in a preferred position to have that rather than other people whose hearts fail before the muscles do. It goes back to exactly what I was saying about people that cannot do the fitness test. It's not that their muscles are tired. It's because this failed. This says, because the heart will respond to whatever you need to do. Think about your fight and flight. So you're walking along millions of years ago and a lion jumped out the bush. Well, your heart, your body, your brain releases those chemicals and it says run. It says you've got to either run or you've got to fight, whichever one you've got to do. But what happens is when that release of chemicals happen, your heart rate speeds up. Well, if these fail, if your muscles fail and it can't perform, well, you're not going to get away, are you? Yeah, it's great to have a strong one of these. That's what you need, because once this is working, what you can do is flipping hell, I got away this time, but what I now need to do is train these muscles to be able to get away and be more efficient. So once you get these more efficient, guess what? You've got this great engine. These have got stronger. These have got faster. And all of a sudden, everything falls into place.
We're talking about balance again. And that's what we're talking about. I mean, whatever exercise you undertake on a bike, whether it be the strength endurance, the 60, 65 work, the 85, 90, we call the sprint endurance intervals, that we undertake when we put people through that last 10 minutes of class where we try to take you to the limit. The heart is getting a fantastic workout no matter what. And Mel said that, getting your heart rate up around that 85 to 90% of maximum is really the critical element of why we take people into those red zones. It's not really to create that much, from the legs. The legs are getting a good workout anyway. Getting your heart rate up to that 85 to 90, actually, what you're looking at is training that left ventricle. It's the stroke volume. It's the ability of your body to push more blood around the body with every single pulse of that heart. So every time it pulses, more blood goes round, more oxygen has entered it, it's oxygenated blood, and therefore more oxygenated blood ends up at your legs. And that's exactly what the road you're on, Kathy. You're getting to the point now where it seems like your aerobic system is pretty good. What you need to do now is get that oxygen to the legs to keep those legs going. And that's...
And this is why I feel women really take to indoor cycling, because once that all falls into place, they get that balance of, this is working really well.
Yeah.
They're really confident. The body then falls into line with their aesthetics and everything else, the upright walking and everything else. And then all of a sudden that all falls together. And I'm just going to keep doing that because it works for me. Balanced with a good resistance training regime as well. You've got the whole package.
Yeah. That's exactly right, and that's the point with the reason I set up CicloZone, to be totally honest with you, was exactly, I come from a pure racing bred cycling background. I'm happier on Zwift than I am anywhere else, or out on the road than anywhere else, on my bike with my backside on fire, flying along, doing what I do best, which is competing against other cyclists and pushing myself to the limit. But that's not my passion anymore. My passion is to take what my body has actually benefited from all those years and giving them to these millions of cyclists that are doing all of these platforms that don't understand exactly what they're doing and how much more beneficial it could be to their body just by making a few simple changes and educating the brain a little bit about what they're doing, and understanding that, you know, not all platforms are created equal. Some of them are out there, you know, are just giving you what you think you want. I will stand and I will stand there and say, I am not going to appeal to everybody out there, because not everybody wants to get on a bike and do what I'm asking them to do. And I understand that, but I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people out there who are just looking for that extra. They're thinking there must be something more to this. You know, there's more to this. And I think there's a lot of people we've seen both on the M3R users group over lockdown and also the CicloZone guys that have seen this journey. They've joined thinking this is just an indoor cycle program, but they've been drawn in by the power side of it and actually started to realize that actually, yes, by doing the correct cadence and the correct intensity for the correct amount of time, and then recovering at the correct cadence at the correct intensity for the correct amount of time, is really great for the human body. Listen to the instructors that know. And then because we put it to great music, you can still have a great time doing it. We got big graphics on screen and, you know, but what you've got to realize in every single one of our classes, every single interval is created understanding energy systems, understanding how to create power, and understanding how we can create a better human being out of the people who are riding with us. And that's what I want to achieve. Always remembering that we're not training cyclists to be better cyclists, although that will happen. I'm creating better human beings. That's what we're trying to create. It's about giving somebody that's simple to use, a bike in their house, a laptop or a tablet. And what we're trying to do is give them a small space, an area in their own home, or an area where they can really achieve great things on their own by just a little understanding of what they're trying to do and what we're trying to do on the bike. And that's what that is.
I love that, Darren. Yeah, let's you know, do this training to not just be great cyclists or improve our you know, ourselves as cyclists, but as human beings.
Yeah. That watt per kilo, that watt per kilo is critical when you get over the age of 50, 60. Most people produce a lot less power and put on a lot more weight. And that means you've got a smaller engine trying to shift around a bigger mass. It's like putting a mini engine in a tank. What you really want is a Ferrari engine in a Mini. That's what you want.
That's it. I don't have any other questions in the chat at the moment. If there aren't any other questions, I mean, you both have been super generous with your time already today, and I know we've gone over a bit of what was originally planned. This was certainly for me fantastic. Great to have met you, Darren, a couple of times. Then Mel today. You guys are so knowledgeable and super informative for us. It's been great. I know, I mean, Darren, that you're on the Kaiser group, and it's been great getting feedback there. But I thought this was a great way to connect, get some other info from both of you.
I think the thing I'd like to finish on is, remember, folks, you've got all this data. Use your data. You know, you've got these bikes with these readouts on. And a lot of people buy these bikes, they have this technology, they'll have these watches on, and they don't use the data. So if you're just rolling along on this bike and you're only working in that 50%, 40%, and you're there, start thinking about what you're actually getting out of what you've done. Because I say to anybody, if I was to say that you are worth £1 million, £2 million, would you invest? Right, okay, so if you invested in this bike, you've invested in this watch, now invest in your health. So the way you're going to invest is actually put the effort in. That's how you're investing. You're paying by putting that effort in. So if you've got all this and you can see, wow, well, my heart rate's only 105 and I should be really working at 155, 160, there's your answer. This is why you're not getting out what you're putting in. And it is a really big thing for me. You really do only get out. You only get out what you put in. If you're not putting in the effort, you're not going to get it out. And that is it. Use the platforms that you've got. Use the equipment you've got to get the best result.
And if you need to educate yourself how to use it, contact the platforms. Contact myself. Mel,
Yep.
ask us. If you don't know, we're all there available. I'm sure there's a lot of people going to be watching this on recording, you know, and they like what we're saying, but they're not quite understanding, you know. Listen, just send a message in the group. We will answer. I answer messages all the time on this group. Mel,
Yep.
you know, ask the question. You know, make sure you've got a certain area you're not sure about. Ask that question. Get yourself informed. Get yourself educated. Like you said, you've all got the Kaiser bikes. You know, you've all got this. You know, you're probably measuring your heart rate. But you probably just don't understand exactly how it works and how you should use that for your own benefit. And yeah, I think it's a good way to finish. Great one, Mel.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Thank you to everyone that was able to come today. We will post it on the group anyway. If you want to have a listen again, if there was something you missed, but hopefully you got a lot out of it, and look forward to doing your classes. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Daniel, thank you so much for setting this up. Mel, as always,
Yeah.
you're an absolute legend, and everybody who joined, thank you very much, and we'll see you again very soon.
Take care, folks. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.